it's me, Ovary Actor, and today we will continue the discussion on Section 2.2 of the WFTDA Rulebook. Section 2.2 states, when a jam begins, the jammers must be touching on or behind the jammer line. Blockers must all be behind the pivot line, ahead of the jammer line, and all non-pivot blockers must not be touching the pivot line. If either pivot lines up touching the pivot line at the jam's start, all non-pivot blockers must be behind that pivot's hips. Let's talk about the casebook scenario, C2.2.F. White pivot is seated in the penalty box. Between jams, 3 white blockers, one of whom is wearing a stripe, lines up on the track. Let's take a look at this. So we have a white blocker. Let's say the penalty box is here, right about there. Okay, we'll move this ref out of the way. So white blocker is in the penalty box, and this one has a stripe on its helmet. It's kind of hard to see with that color. At the start of the jam, all these guys are lined up like this, and one of these guys would have a stripe on the helmet. I don't have another one to show. I'll use this. Pretend that is a stripe on the helmet. What would happen in this situation? The outcome. If the jam starts with 2 white skaters wearing a stripe, the officials should direct the white blocker on the track to remove their stripe. Just take it off. Rationale. The skater seated in the box is considered to be the white pivot for the jam. As the white team fielded the correct number of blockers, there's no need to send the extra white pivot back to their bench. Keep in mind, if the white blocker refuses to remove the stripe, that white blocker should be penalized. Refusal to obey an instruction about improper gameplay is insubordinate. Don't do that. Keep in mind, if the white blocker engages in any privileges reserved for the pivot before they have removed the stripe, even if no warning has yet been issued, that white blocker should be penalized as their illegal stripe had an impact on the game. So far in the rules we've discussed, the only benefit to being a pivot and the advantage of having the pivot status, as we've discussed so far in part 2.2, is that the pivot may be touching the pivot line. So what would happen is if there was a pivot in the box, and just pretend with me that this is also a white pivot, okay? This white pivot is having an illegal stripe on their helmet, as there already is one pivot considered in this jam, just in the penalty box. If this pivot starts the jam, this blocker, this is not a pivot, because there already is a pivot. This is the pivot. No, you're not the pivot. You can't be touching this line at the start of the jam. Wow. Don't do that. Don't do that. If she has a pivot cover, she's the pivot, not you. Take it off or be insubordinate. And then you can go to the penalty box too.